Alright, another draft physics video presentation. DraftScience here on YouTube. So comments and such, just general subjects, who knows where I'll go. We'll see what happens. Junk video. Yeah, probably, mostly. It's not my fault. The commenters sort of require it to be a junk video. So they can't do anything but junky stuff. Anyway, there's a sub-subject. YouTube is, made it possible in the future, through its terms of service, that it may start putting ads on non-monetized channels. And, I don't like that very much. And also, I have a lot of videos that I don't like very much in terms of, they really just don't make the point as concisely and as clearly as I would like. And, frankly, I've been wrong in the past, and that doesn't help. So it's better to, just find the cream of the thousands of videos and make those available. So I probably am going to delist the videos on this channel eventually. And I'm going to take the best of them and put them on the website, so there'll be a safe copy somewhere. And we'll see what happens. I'm not saying I'm leaving YouTube or anything like that. I'm just saying it's. I'm probably going to make my profile on YouTube smaller, and have the superfluous extra stuff somewhere else, something like that. Anyway, I don't like being on a capitalist platform and all of that kind of crap. Not that I'm a communist, but I just mean capitalism is bad, okay, the way it's been implemented. A bunch of, everything for profit. There's no we the people choice. The we the people option doesn't exist. We could do this by just making a business that runs, and it doesn't have to be an owner. We don't have to pay rent to owners. That would be the way to do some of this infrastructure, is just to pay what it costs and nothing more. And, if you want to put ads in their video, let them do it. Anyway, frankly. But whatever. So that's something in the background, just giving you forewarning that someday, the substance of my videos may not be accessible through the regular means. You'll have to have the link to the video and all that kind of crap, or they'll actually be on some other platform. But anyway, so 2 comments, I suppose. I don't think there's any other news matters much. Except I did a video last night that that I am, I'd argue that yes, this does much better than I did 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, I had enough evidence to convince me that the conventional theory was crap, and that it was being hyped, and the evidence was being exaggerated and manipulated, presented to you in a way that was, we're just going to show you the stuff that confirms our theory. We're not going to show you the stuff that demonstrates some flaw in the theory. And you could see that in the way physics was presented. So it started with the 2-slit experiment in terms of the lousy explanations of, Heisenberg and superposition, and related to some kind of entanglement and the creation of new universes and photons that are aware of whether we're looking at them, all kinds of bizarre speculations. And I clearly had no interest in, that just doesn't sound like the right answer or anywhere close to it. It sounds like a religion. It smelled of a religion. It just doesn't sound like the right answer at all. Just wishful thinking, and much more complex than it. The elemental universe doesn't have a brain. It can't do fancy things. So it just doesn't sound like a reasonable explanation. And certainly bent space was nonsense. I mean, it just doesn't say anything about a mechanism. There's no mechanism. It's just saying it just does. Well, that's not a good answer. Anyway, and so then I started picking around, and you run into all these circumstances that require an explanation. This complex, weird thing is happening. The two-slit experiment, all that, and you get lost in all their hype, and so you start chasing down things and trying to figure out what's real and what's not real. What experimentally has actually been demonstrated, what hasn't. All that kind of stuff. They tell you about detector experiments, so you think it's some sort of real thing, and find out, oh, that's not a real thing. you know. And so, yeah, after 10 years, I finally gotten a very clear, and being able to state it in a very clear way that the evidence doesn't point to their theory. It points to a different theory. Okay, a different mechanism works better, and that's just a fact. And I think I've made that clear. And we'll just see if see if any honest people rise to the surface and concede that conventional science is pretty bad science. So I'll make a video on gravity, likewise, a very short and concise and right to the pointer, and then maybe one on at least the parts of the theory of relativity, in the sense that they have stated that this has been overwhelmingly proven, and all of the avenues of evidence are really suspect. The Eddington experiment, the whole idea of photons being bent by anything except scatter, except interaction with atoms, electrons anyway. All right, and the whole model of the atom thing too. That's all pretty solid. That there is a counter explanation that just makes so much more sense. Alright, so with that context, so we'll see what happens. Like I said, there is a physicist who didn't get back to me, and now he got back to me again, and so we'll see if I can arrange a conversation where he can explain how I'm wrong. But, we'll see what happens, see if it happens. Again, $1,500 to any channel with more than 100,000 subscribers that wishes to take, I'll link the video below, point out how that counter theory isn't simpler and a more complete explanation of all the slit phenomenon experiments with photons. Now, the ones with electrons are a whole nother subject, because they're not as simple as just shining electrons on two slits and then seeing the pattern. And if they were that simple, then it would all be simple and there wouldn't be a problem. But no, there is a problem, because those experiments get quite complicated. Lots of little magic boxes in between the source and the outcome, and lots of reasons to suspect shenanigans. Anyway. So we'll start with Lily Post. I just watched this man's video on his theories, and is there something he's got right? Now, unfortunately, I watched some of the video, half of it anyway, and he's the true, pure tinfoil hat kooker. He couldn't have a messier background, couldn't be in more disheveled. He's like the perfect, almost, homeless loony. At least trying to look like he's videoing from his dumpster. So in that sense, he was perfect, but it would be a good example where I just show you how easy it is to just point out to the nutters, so to speak, where they go off on their nutty tangents, and it's all the woo peddlers of conventional physics. It's, fairly easy to point out where, well, you're jumping to a conclusion there, aren't you? The whole dark matter thing is just so obviously a God of the gaps kind of answer. It's a ludicrous suggestion, frankly, for scientists to sit there and say, well, let me suggest that there's this invisible magic thing that does exactly what we want it to do and nothing else. Oh yeah, isn't that nice? It just erases all your mistakes on your paper. What? It's just like the quantum computer thing, like the magical bit that can do 17 different things at once. What? Too silly. Anyway, So I watched it, and yes, he was starting to get some of these ideas that the sun is communicating with the earth, and so he's turning into some sort of communication thing and all that kind of stuff, when no, it's shooting bullets. Everything's communicating by throwing momentum at each other. They're all blowing viruses at each other, kind of thing. That's the interaction. The interaction is by excreting something, reflecting it, and that is what you're messaging to the rest of the universe, that you're here. Every position you're in, you reflect something different from all those different positions, and you're reflecting it to the entire universe. You're communicating with everything, theoretically. I mean, yes, some things you don't communicate with because nothing reflects off you and goes that way, but theoretically you're communicating with the entire universe. So you can make it into sounds like a grander story than it is, and that's what a lot of these people do. But where he goes into left field is kind of like the Ken Wheelers and all of them really. They start talking about magnetism, and everything starts turning into some swirly, wormholey orb of blah blah. And there's just no evidence that a single that magnets are sitting here, and there's there's a bunch of stuff. The magnet is sitting here forever theoretically. It's just sitting here forever theoretically, and somehow it's doing a whole bunch of work. That somehow a bunch of shit is flying all around it, and it's doing all kinds of crap and blah blah blah. Where's the energy come from all that stuff? What do you mean? What are you talking about? How is it doing that? So it's another magical theory, that there's a bunch of magical gravity forcing the little particles to do so. It's just it's on its face. Just whoops, that looks like a mistake. That's sort of what I learned through this process of 10 years, is that I didn't have any real affection for swirly bits, but just sort of accepted this whole orbiting models and stuff, and so you started thinking about things having spins and all this kind of crap. But then when you really go through it and you start drawing it, you start saying, well, where's the energy come for that, and where's the energy come for that, and where's the energy for that, where's all this stuff getting all this energy? If I see a ball bouncing down the street, I know somebody probably kicked it. There's nothing you don't have free bouncing down the street, for matter anyway. The forces, then you can sort of understand that they just keep going. You can't kill them. All you can do is slow them down a little bit. So anyway, so it would have been a nice example for me to play some of this video and just point out that you can just politely talk to the nutters and just explain that there's absolutely sorry, it's really being problematic wire. Stop it. Anyway, sorry, didn't know it was going to do that. I would have paused if I knew ahead of time. See, if I knew there was a subliminal super speed, like the D-Hillsters will jump to some conclusion, like there's some subgravity moving the speed of light squared and all this, and you're just like, what are you talking about? Do you really think the universe has something in it doing that? And you think that no creature on Earth evolved the capacity to take advantage of this instantaneous knowledge thing? It could know things instantaneously, essentially. It doesn't have to wait for the information. I mean, come on. It would leak into our reality if it existed, just like the ESP particles would leak into our reality if it existed. Anyway, so yeah, nice try, but yeah, he took down his video. I mean, made it private, so I guess we'll just remove that comment because it really can't be relevant anymore. So Flyoris says, in response to your response, so I guess I'll respond to your response of my response. Damn it. The Instagram account is about physics. Well, I mean, I can find physicists on YouTube. I can find thousands of them. The point is there has to be some indication that they actually know something about elemental physics, the foundational stuff. They want to discuss Newton and elemental functions. So they have to have some knowledge of the two-slit experiment, more than just what they've been told. some ability to critique the evidence, like they've actually looked at the evidence. So just being a physicist isn't really good enough, and there has to be some context, some willingness to engage in a conversation about whether physics is full of shit. And every physicist is clearly not going to be interested in that conversation. They really don't want to be challenged to prove their physics to something other than a moron. It's really easy when you're just talking to somebody who doesn't know anything, but you can tell them all kinds of stories about all the big evidence you have and how it's the most proven theory in the history of mankind and all that kind of crap. And it works because, those viewers won't know to say, that's a pile of shit. So anyway, so he produces work on Instagram. So again, this is your thing, okay? I mean, you're coming on this medium, YouTube. You give me a link to a YouTube channel, and then you're talking about Instagram. I don't, I'm sorry if you don't understand why I find that rather a convoluted way to tell me, well, here's a random physicist, is what you're really saying. Here's a random physicist. Why don't you harass him into a conversation? Is that what you're asking me to do? I'm really not interested in harassing people. Okay, I'm interested in finding people who are interested in truly defending their beliefs. They're interested in attempting to do that in a kind of honest way. Sorry if that was useless. Yeah, well, okay, fine, but yes, it was useless, and fine, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying, if you're going to suggest something as if it's really, I got somebody on the hook, you have to have them somewhere near the hook. Frankly. Realistically. Alright, out of just clear blue insanity, Brandon Kratz. So this is some kind of, I don't know what he is, trolley kind of thing. Operation Kill Brandon might work better when your plant talks his way out of attempted burglary and trespassing. So apparently he thinks I have a plant somewhere that's doing something, that's robbing him, stealing what? Your Cracker Jack prize trophies? I mean, he probably has a bunch of little things he got in Cracker Jack, and he probably has them on a little display stand, and somebody attempted to steal it or something. I don't know. Time is hell of a drug. I mean, Brandon, you really do know you're crazy, right? I mean, you know inside, deep inside. Like when you really look in there, you say, okay, I know I'm just totally batshit out of my mind. You do know that, right? So let's not pretend you don't know it. Let's not make excuses. Oh yeah, the dog told me to go murder people. Come on, you got a real problem. And that you really have to work on it, or just shut up. Just mind your own business, Just throw knives at the mirror or something, Keep yourself safe, from being a menace of some kind. Okay, so you're really, 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 really crazy. And you probably need some pills for that or something. But you know that. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Come on. Be honest. Come on, just admit you're loop-de-doo nuts. And just because we're not locking you in the crazy house, you ought to just know, well, I ought to do it. You ought to just keep yourself in a little closed world where you can't do any harm because you're out of your fucking mind. And you know it. Alright, someone said to me, who cares, but anyway, light is not matter, therefore materialism is false because there are things in the universe not made out of matter. So, what's the argument? If I use the word instead of materialism, I use somethingism, right? And I claim that some things are things that have properties. Okay, like nothing doesn't have any properties, it doesn't do anything, it's nothing. And then the some things all have properties, they all have some kind of container they fit in. Even if there was a God, the God wouldn't be everything. I mean, that's just too silly. right? The God would have to be a something of some kind. He obviously isn't everything, because where's his brain and where's his feet? And, I should be able to find these things. So he's not made out of everything. He's certainly something else. Something else. So, you can't break somethingism. Okay, so it's just, you're just playing with this little word problem where we use the word matter in two different kind of contexts, in the sense of something that actually exists and something like a force that actually exists, but it's doing something more than just matter does. Right? It's moving the speed of light, for example. Okay, so it's different. Now, electrons and protons, we can think of them and say they're charges, and so we could say that's matter. But the fact is they are fundamentally different, right? The protons do get stuck in the nucleus, and the electrons do get stuck on the outside. So there's something fundamentally different about the positive charge and the negative charge, and that the proton is heavier. It's something else that's quite different than the positive charge. And, we can make these deductions, but do we say materialism is broken because the two things that are supposed to be very much alike, the inverse of each other, the yin and the yang, and yet there's an imbalance somewhere? Yins don't do what yangs do all the time and in all circumstances. They're different. So we say, materialism is broken because matter itself has different kinds of matter in it. No, you don't do any of that. That's just nonsense. So, what do you think about this? Yeah, so, you're actually interested when somebody says something, this kind of jargon comes out of people like, I got a big got you about the whole universe, and I can deconstruct all of philosophy with one stupid, idiotic semantics sentence. I'm going to use a semantics bullshit sentence to abolish all philosophical theory. It's so pathetic. It's like the is ought gap crap and all of that crap. You can't establish any is that imposes an ought. Yes, I can. I can just establish that there's a statement of fact about an is that has value in it, and now we have ought. So anything where I say you're obligated to be obedient to the fact that there's a difference between profit and a deficit. And one is intrinsically on one side of a fence, and the other one's intrinsically on the other side of the fence. And you can't make black white. But whatever. It's just, you can't see how this kind of bullshit is just that bullshit. That defining reality takes a few more words and a few more finer definitions, and that this semantics, this Nietzschean semantics crap, just can't mean anything. I'm just going to play with the words. I'm going to play I gotcha games because somebody used the word in a different context to have a different meaning, and therefore I'm going to pretend the word doesn't have any meaning. So disgusting. So anyway, I'm removing it because it's just babble. Alright. So then John Smythe, rude and obnoxious and just disgusting. But anyway, it's so much more fun to watch your daily word salad. So it's word salad to make explicit arguments about basic contentions made by other physicists. So physicists make arguments. You point out how those arguments are fallacious, nonsensical, they aren't based on evidence, they're just stories they're telling. And you overtly demonstrate that. You overtly play them saying crap that just isn't true. And that's word salad. Okay. To clue you in. Anyway. And I love the bonus irony of you, of all people, lecturing about good citizenship. So again, what about anything I have ever advocated doesn't have something to do with being productive by advancing the human condition? Where have I advocated for anything other than that? And that somehow you have some evidence that I'm not a good citizen? That I throw litter in the street? That I overtly break laws? That somehow I don't care about social order, or I don't think there should be any democracy or any of that crap. Where have you seen that argument? Oh, that's right, nowhere. So I guess that's not an irony. Asshole. 1500s to buy exposure and still no takers. Yes, part of the purpose is to buy exposure. That's the whole point of it, right? And there's a whole bunch of people, as I showed yesterday's video, the one in the morning, that there's a bunch of totally underappreciated and underrespected and underacknowledged and under argued things out there because of your pop culture bias, because you just keep doing this popularity contest thing, and popularity breeds popularity, and you just keep fucking it up in the sense that you're evading the fact that you're not having a good it's not a very good Olympics, because you're really not inviting all of the world's athletes to the contest. You're discriminating based on nonsensical and idiotic reasons, So, fuck you. Ouch. Yeah, oh yeah, you really hurt me deeply. Not even close. And the $1,500 again just demonstrates how lame they are. The fact is that the debunkers, the defenders of the conventional horseshit, we see what they waste their time on. Flat Earth. Is that showing what great gladiators they are? They're such great gladiators, they beat up retards. And that's what they do every day, is just beat up retards. And you applaud. Because you're a lame asshole. So Zohar says, fuck you. I mean, that's not terribly helpful. I mean, it's sort of my knee-jerk reaction, but it really doesn't up the level of the conversation much. Thank you for demonstrating why you are the intellectual cream of the crop among Draft's devotees. Whether he's a devotee or not, he's a listener, and apparently you are too. And you're showing that you're not very creamy either, that you're just kind of a fat blob. A big, giant blob of useless, pointless fat. Okay, so then Zohar adds more. You're welcome. Your annoying trash talk comments show you're not interested in talking about getting to the core of the actual subject. Well, he's clearly denying the subject. He just wants to pretend and make it go away. So all of these arguments that have been made demonstrating how weakly evidenced conventional propaganda is, and he doesn't want to defend it. He doesn't want to in any way show how those accusations are not true. He just wishes to malign with some cheap shit talk that doesn't mean anything. So, and again, he doesn't put up anything. He doesn't have his image online. He doesn't make any videos. He doesn't do anything that I could likewise critique with just trivial arguments to humiliate him based on how short or ugly he is. Because that's all he's got is arguments here. He doesn't have any kind of argument. I'll just say whatever your video is about, I'll just say it's trivial. And I'll just point out how you're just some psycho nut who's got way too big an ego, and that's why you're making videos. I mean, I'll just apply the same tactics, all right, to you, and we'll see what your response is. Kind of like all those big physics channels that haven't taken the money yet, although maybe we just need to wait a bit longer before someone grabs it. Well, if the economy tanks further, maybe they'll get a little more desperate for the money, and finally somebody will say, I'm going to grab that money before somebody else does. But the truth is they have no counter argument. They're not going to be able to argue my arguments and in any way come off scientific or fair or anything other than, yeah, no, Gary, you're right. I mean, there's good reason to doubt what physicists say. They do jump to conclusions. And yes, it's just a fact that they present evidence in this very biased manner. I mean, it's insanely biased. Nail in the coffin evidence! When, no, it really isn't. Alright. I mean, all these physicists know what radio jamming is, right? I mean, it's a really sensible common phenomenon, and not in one case where they're discussing two source interference Do they ever bring up the fact that, well, the theory of jamming is exactly the same math? I mean, there's dishonesty is just pretty obvious. The dishonest presentation of the evidence is just so obviously presented and made clear. All right, so then he says again, you keep saying I am here by myself and no one is willing to talk to me. Well, that's clearly not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you're full of shit. I have a theory that you're full of shit, okay? That the ideas in your stupid little retarded brain are mush and garbage, that you're really just a religious kook. That's what I'm arguing, is that conventional physics is just another religion. That's all it is. It's just a bunch of bizarre speculation that's clearly bred out of wishful and hopeful thinking. And it doesn't have anything to do with reality. It doesn't have anything to do with what the evidence really says. All right, do you really not get the irony of your favorite phrase, get what you deserve, applying to you? I don't see the irony. So, he's talking like I deserve some kind of punishment because I've pointed out and clearly illustrated that the emperor is naked. So the kid who says, hey, the emperor's naked, he deserves to be what? Killed, pilloried, insulted, thrown in the garbage and pissed on? What dishonest thing have I done here, jackass? Can you point to one phrase or one sentence out of any of my videos where you think I was being willfully dishonest? That in any way I said something that I didn't sincerely believe to be true? Anywhere in any of these videos where I've done anything to deserve anything but a nice pat on the back and an ice cream cone? What the fuck have I done to deserve anything other than, hey, well done, Gary? Okay, yes, you did a lot of work and you're correct. The analysis is correct. A counter theory can work. When we say this stuff like, no particle theory can explain it, well, maybe that's a pile of crap. Maybe they haven't tried to make any particle theory explain it. And that if somebody actually tries to make a theory that would work, it's not that hard to do because I did it. So again, how do you think this argument actually works? Do you actually think that I'm in some way think I have been dishonest? That there's something about any of this conversation where there was any part of it that I have anything to be embarrassed by or to feel bad about? I mean, even the parts where I was wrong in the past, where I said something that's just wrong, incorrect. At the time I said it, I had no idea it was incorrect. So again, what is my crime? Oh, I'm not perfect? Yeah, that's true. I'm not perfect. All right, but the fact is that I have made the argument I'm making has integrity, and the demonstration of that is it just keeps getting better and better and better and better. What a little piece of scum you are. Oh, filthy, dirty, stinking, lousy, rotten crap. I mean, it's just so lame. You can't make a single physics argument. All right, thanks. Not written out. You so much for showing duality is bull and the slit experiment has answers. Well, that's the important part. The fact is that you don't have to believe all this wooey crap. There is a simpler explanation that is more complete. That's the irony of it. And again, the fact is they have been lying. All right. I mean, and in the sense that they are lying that they've done any analysis. I mean, me figuring out the part where the two, the two vectors going towards the center, where it's equidistant from the 2 points, isn't actually part of the real pattern. That the real line vectors are really about lines going this way and lines going that way being this, being wavelength difference. And when you do the going against each other thing, you're sort of cheating the experiment, because that only happens within a tiny 0.5 millimeter. So it's only a tiniest part of the pattern. It's not a real maxima. It's a fake one. It's a phony one. They could have figured that part out, and they didn't. The fact that I'm pointing out the simple, obvious fact that there's a certain number of nodes, and that's all there are. There's not an infinite number. They don't go on a flat plane forever. They don't do any of that stuff. There's a specific number of nodes, and it's going to be created by just dividing the wavelength into the distance, and that's it. They should have told people that 200 years ago. That shouldn't be some, oh, we just discovered that. Nobody should be doing, oh, we just discovered that in 2020, we figured that out. That shouldn't be the reality. That it took 200 years from the Young experiment to sit there and just point out, oh, this is a pattern moving through space. And, the rational way to look at it is angles, because that's really what you're comparing. They have all those sine thetas. Do they think there's an infinite number of angles? I mean, what was the theory? There's an infinite number of angles? No, there's only a certain number of angles, a certain number of thetas where it's possible for there to be constructive interference. So they should have acknowledged a long time ago that the distance is just telling you how many nodes there are. It'll tell you exactly how many bars will be in the 180 degrees. They should have figured that out 200 years ago. Alright. So, shithead, back again. Some questions about your explanations. Now, it's a counter theory, but fine, of the single double slit experiments. Please restrict your explanations to your theory without diverting into mainstream theories. Well, frankly, I can do that, but why should I have to? The whole point is to contrast the truth against their bullshit. The whole point is to show how they didn't tell you, oh, the pattern's really made out of an explicit number of nodes. They didn't tell you, oh yeah, part of the pattern happens in 1 millimeter of space. They didn't tell you any of that, okay? They're part of the story of why I exist, why I have to make this counter argument. And the theory is so obvious. If you just did what I've stated on the website, if you just go back and start over without all the Einstein rubbish in your head, without all the entanglement, superposition nonsense in your head, and you just start over and say, can I make a mechanical theory that explains the outcome? Yes, you can. It's not that difficult. It's just a frequency, right? I mean, it's not that complicated. It's a frequency going into two slits. I mean, or even a single slit, right? It's not that complicated. All right. I'm not defending the mainstream. Well, you have in all of your previous comments. What are you doing? You're saying you have no right. You deserve to be punished because you have challenged the authority. That's what I've done in these videos. 90% of the content of the video is a demonstration about how they're lying or deceiving you or faking you or duping you. Right? That's 90% of the content is pointing out how they're making these extraordinary claims and providing quite ordinary or less than ordinary evidence. Oh, you're just such an asshole. So what it says or doesn't is irrelevant here. Well, it's not irrelevant to me, and it's certainly not irrelevant to anybody, like, say, at trial. There's only a trial because some other asshole is saying guilty and you're saying innocent. If the other asshole would shut up, I don't have to say I'm innocent, do I? Unless they accuse me of being guilty. They're making a strong and definitive assertion. Their assertion, in my opinion, is absolute crap. And you don't think that's relevant. I think that's very relevant. All right. Does every photon arriving at the slit surface get reassembled on the target screen? Oh, you mean does every bit go somewhere? I think I explained it in the video, right? I said some of the little bits actually hit the surface of the slits, right? So they're not going anywhere, at least not today, right? They might pop out tomorrow as heat. They might pop out 10 minutes later. They might pop out 5 minutes later. They might reflect. Who knows? They might go somewhere, but they're not going to make a photon. Okay. So everyone doesn't get reassembled, but all the ones that go through, right? It's a bunch of machine gun bullets. Some of them hit the slit. They're not going anywhere. The rest of them, the ones that do go through the slit and then get deflected or go straight, all of those will hit the target. Yes. Just like two radio signals can shoot to your antenna, and you can't receive either one. You're getting hit, your antenna's getting hit, bombarded with two radio signals, out of phase with each other. Same station, out of phase. And you can't receive either one. It doesn't change the fact that the antenna is getting hit by a lot of radiation. You can't convert any of it into a decipherable signal. You can't say, I have a signal. You don't. You got nothing. All right. If not, what percent get reassembled? Well, you could say 50%, right? We're just saying it's scatter. And all you're saying is that some locations they get reassembled, some locations they don't. Now, clearly the bar pattern is telling you the white spaces, the places where there is some light are bigger than the places where there's no light, sort of indicating a little bit, okay, that this isn't proportional. And the light spaces don't get gradually darker and then gradually lighter and then gradually darker, indicating that clearly there is some ability to be a little bit out of phase. Like one of the bits can be 515 nanometers away, and then this bit could be 493 nanometers away, and this bit could be blah 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 blah, and it would just be averaged and be close enough. So it would come out to be red-ish, So yeah, there's some variability that's okay, and the photon is reconstructed. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, then there'd just be little tiny lines if it had to be perfect. There'd be a little white line, and then a big giant space, and then a little white line, Alright. Do you have a formula predicting what percent gets reassembled at various points on the target? I don't need one, but and clearly the other point to raise is that I think he might be implying that the light gets brighter. Well, of course, the more sources you add, okay, it's like any probability math. When you're trying to create a pattern that goes A, B, C, right? So it has components to it. They have to be in the right order. So it's more than just two things. There has to be three things in the right order. The more sources of parts, the more you increase the probability. So when there's only two sources, the probability might be 60-40 or something. When there's three sources, okay, then you magnify that possibility because now there's a lot more chances. So it's like the inverse square law. You double the sources, you quadruple the probability of having a match. So that's part of what would be part of the math. Okay, but I don't. It's not my job to do a bunch of statistical stuff. That's all done by other people. I don't need to do that. But that's a statistical reality. Is that when you're trying to make a pattern that's complex, as you increase the sources, you multiply the potential for making the pattern. So the more complex the pattern is, the more the added sources increase the potential. Is the angle of the scatter at the slit surface quantized? So I guess he's saying, is there some sort of is it obliged to be 10%, 20%, 30% angles? 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 50? No. Okay, it's pure scatter. So they can go anywhere. No, all degrees are open. Okay, 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, they're all available. They won't all be equal. Okay, the argument would be is that the scatter range is limited. So if you hit one electron, you're a little quanta, you hit an electron, you're not going to scatter 90 degrees. You're going to scatter some percentage, 20, let's say at the most. The worst interaction you have to think the electrons are repelling each other. They're not going to actually, photons do hit electrons. The electron is in tension. So the tension of its atom is going to decide which way it's going to go based on how the momentum interacts with the electron. So if it's on an arc, the electron, you're going to understand that if I hit it here, it's going to go this way. If I hit it when it's here, it's going to go straight. So depending on where the electron is in the tension and what angle I'm hitting it at will decide what direction it goes. So I'm just saying it's more probable that it leaves in some pretty straight line this way. But the truth is after it hits one electron, then the photon leaves, it can hit another electron and be bent again. But yes, the whole pattern obviously is demonstrating pretty clearly that there's a whole lot less probability of it going 90 degrees, right? We don't see any of those 90-degree photons. So obviously that's very improbable. And that the pattern really is formed within a, 15-degree span. The pattern that you'll see. The other photons are so rare that you don't see any pattern in those locations. It's there, you just can't see it. And you certainly can't see it on a flat screen, because looking at it with a flat screen, obviously the photons that have a higher angle are being broadcast over much larger spaces on a flat screen, and so obviously you're not going to see those photons because you're broadcasting them on a much larger surface. All right. Why or why not? He says, whatever. It's scatter. Okay, it obeys the same rules as Compton scatter, or whatever the other guy's name is, scatter. Anyway, assuming a coherent stream of incoming photons, all with the same polarization, is the polarization preserved at the target screen? Well, obviously it has to be recreated, so that's a key factor in all of this. It might be that we could actually convert the red light. You could put the red light in and you recreate a high frequency. When you have a perfectly out of wavelength, you could argue that that's just doubling the frequency. So when I put two red photons at 500 nanometers into each other out of phase, I actually would create a blue photon, at 250 nanometers. But the problem is the red photon's polarization is twice as big as the blue photon. So if I made the blue photon's polarization twice as big, it doesn't work. It's not the right antenna size. So we're back to how polarization is created and how electricity is caused. Electricity requires you to hit the atomic surface in sequence with the movement of the electron. So let's say I hit an electron, it moves, right? The idea is essentially the next bit has to hit it at the new position. So it's moved through some atoms at the speed of light, because that's almost the speed of electricity. And now you're going to hit it again and give it more momentum. And then you're going to give it that third little bit. So the point is you have to force the flow of the electricity by hitting in sequence. And so polarization is the light. See, if we could make photons that could get through both polarizing film, right? So let's say we fiddled with a photon, try to change its polarization. The truth is we can't make any. There's no photon that'll go through this. Okay, so once I take the polarizing film and make the bars go both ways, I can't make a photon that has smaller polarization. So the truth is, if I can't make one, and I can't make one reflect off a surface, I can't do anything to make a photon that'll go through both. So I obviously can't undo the polarization. So the polarization is critical. So part of the recreating of the photon on the surface is recreating the polarization. So if you don't do that too, no photon. All right. If so, what is the mechanism guaranteeing it? So again, there's no guarantee. You just either do or do not. Okay, so again, how much of the light we're actually seeing. So, all these experiments have to be understood in these contexts, right? My computer screen right now, I would look at it and I say it's a certain brightness. The truth is it's so much brighter than I'm appreciating, right? Because I'm only counting the photons that went inside my little tiny pupil and then hit my retina. A tiny percentage of the photons that screen is creating right now. It's sending photons here and here and here, all these other places. So theoretically, if I could collect all the light that's coming off of that screen, it's many hundreds or thousands of times, maybe 1,000,000 times more than what I'm registering by looking at it. I'm seeing a tiny, 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 minuscule percentage of the photons coming off that screen. And so you have to understand that's the context of these experiments. We're just seeing a certain amount of radiation, and we're saying that's what's being produced. But the fact is the amount of radiation that actually went into the slits can be a lot bigger than what we see. All right. What prevents the individual bits arriving at the target screen from being scattered off again? So that doesn't make much sense, but I'll keep reading it. What prevents the individual bits arriving at the target screen from being scattered off again before they form a complete photon? Well, what's the odds of that happening in the real world? That's exactly my point. My point is that we're constantly getting hit by an absolutely insane amount of radiation, and then only a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of the universe's radiation is in the form of these coherent photons. And that's just a truth. And I would argue that every time a surface is illuminated, the energy that went in is more than the energy you ever get back as a reflection in terms of what you're going to see. And it was there. Okay? And the fact is yeah, maybe I'll do that. Since it's the end of your comment, I'll go to the paper on this subject because I can illustrate this. So this is the paper from 1909. I thought it was a French guy that did this experiment this way, but apparently it was an English guy who worked with J.J. Thomson. And it's only 2 pages, and it provides no illustrations and doesn't say much at all. But so I'll just paraphrase it. It doesn't say anything, it's just so incomplete. But I can make the argument of why this experiment is a little more complicated than people appreciate, generally speaking. That there's, people are talking about this single photon at a time idea, and it's a little more, it's got a few more edges to it than they're accounting for. Okay, it's not just a straightforward little cube or something. It's a more complex shape than they're appreciating. But it does get to your point about what is a photon in terms of what we actually end up seeing. So the idea is they had a gas flame, okay, and they put a needle, and then they have a screen. And the idea is to try to make it so there's very few photons. So the paper is actually titled, you can find it based on the title, no doubt, Interference Fringes with Feeble Light. All right, so so it's a gas flame, a needle. I'll put a little eye there. And so it's white, it's not monochromatic light at all. And what they had was some sort of fringe pattern that would be blue and red and blue and red and blue and red, and and then and the needle's shadow. Okay. And so that was what they were looking at. So it wasn't a great pattern, it wasn't any of that stuff. And the idea is can I diminish the number of photons that get through by putting a soot-covered screen, and maybe make 2 or 3 of them to ensure the function. And then I do the same experiment with this soot-covered screen, and then I let it wait, up to 3 months. So the longest they waited was 3 months. So they set up a box, put this inside, and let it sit for 3 months. And the idea is they get the same pattern. Okay, so the photograph comes out looking the same. Based on how many screens they put in the way versus how long they wait. So if they wait 3 months, they have 3 screens. If they wait 1 month, they have 2 screens. If they wait 2 weeks, they have 1 screen, blah, 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 blah. Get the idea. So it's a perfectly sensible experiment in a sense. Like you're saying, okay, well, if the photons are taking that long to get there, then, there can't be more than one in the experiment at a time, so they can't be interfering with. They have to be created by an event that takes place. Each photon is deciding where it goes. Each photon has a trajectory and lands someplace. So that's basically what they were pointing out. So this is before entanglement and superposition and all those wacky theories. So in a sense, it was proving that light's a particle. In a sense. in my opinion. That would be my interpretation. But see, it was J.J. Thomson's opinion that as you diminish the light, the pattern would go away. So in a sense, they were disproving their theory. So it was closing an avenue of speculation is what all the experiment was for. Let's close an avenue of speculation about what's causing the phenomenon and whether this phenomenon has to happen with single events. Each single event knows what to do. It doesn't need other events to be happening at the same time for the event to happen. So in no way do the elements of this pattern interact with each other. And that's what it was sort of clearly pointing out. All right, well, anyway. So, but what you really you have to think about is what is the dark screen actually doing and how are photons actually produced. So one way we see that photons are produced is electricity, right? Lightning bolts. Oh, I didn't check to see if you can see any of this. Oh boy. You can, so good. So lightning bolts are really, and what happens? It's all or nothing, right? An electron, a 50 kilovolt electron will produce 500 photons. They speculate anyway. So it's not like you can have events that aren't as discrete as the photon. The events that cause photons aren't necessarily as discrete as a single photon. So the idea would be is that you have to kind of think about it as a current jumping across an electrical gap. That it creates 5 million photons all at once or none at all, right? There's no photon or there's 5 million photons. So that's part of what you have to understand about the source of light in the first place. That light is produced based on these electrical effects, and you could argue that when the electrical effect actually happens, it doesn't create a single photon, it creates many photons. So that there is no way to create one photon at a time because it's either a package of photons or no photon. Because the energy that's causing it has more than one photon worth of energy in it. The movement of the electron has more than one photon worth of energy. That kind of idea. And that sort of makes sense. Okay, so that's one point to argue, is that the photons are being produced in clumps. Clumps of photons at a time. 1,000, 400, 200, whatever the number would be. So lots of little bits moving. Okay, not just one little bit moving. Now the other argument would be is that just like the interferometer and the beam splitter, what's happening when I'm putting this sooted screen in front of the gas flame, right? Well, the idea is that there's a tiny place where there's less soot, and there's less soot here, and there's a little place here with less soot, and there's a little place here with less soot. And so the idea is that no photon with a big giant polarization, right? The polarization of the photon is huge. We've already described that. And this little hole is maybe just a few atoms across. So a whole photon can't possibly get through those little tiny holes. So you already know that whatever's coming out of those holes isn't a photon. No whole photon is ever coming out of this screen. And the only thing you can possibly do is you do the same thing where I'm arguing small aperture, Newton's argument. It's a small aperture. The bit can fly out this way, it can fly out that way, it can be bent lots of different directions depending on what surface it's closest to. And these are going to be irregular surfaces, by the way. They're not going to be perfectly round or anything like that. So only bits of photon are flying out, and they're flying out in all directions again. So the theory would be is that if you do collect any photons, say if I just put this dark screen, no needle in the way, no nothing, I just put the dark screen and I'm going to collect the light. What am I really going to collect? Am I going to collect the photon that actually went into the screen in one piece, pieces of photon, and that same photon is going to make the image? No, what's more probable that's going to happen is that one of the little bits will come from over here, one of the little bits will come from over here, one of the little bits will come from over here, one of the little bits will come from over here, and those bits will create the phase and polarization required to call that a photon. That's what's the likelihood. So you're already recreating the image. Before you even put the needle in, you've already broken the photons and are recreating photons. And now the question is, so I throw a needle in here, what's going to happen? Well, the needle is just going to provide more opportunity for this very thing to happen, because now we have more surfaces to interact with, the surface of the needle. So now the needle is going to take a bit from over here and a bit from over here, and the needle is going to send them to the same location and create the photon. So the needle is an asset rather than a deficit to making photons. So the sooted surface broke them. The needle has some help in reconstructing them, and now you're just going to make a pattern based on where the angles of reconstruction provide this length of line difference, right? I mean, it's just about how long is the line, right? How long is the line from the source, okay, to the target? How long is that line? And can I create two lines that end up creating phase? And the phase would be the period of the photon. Can I recreate from these different places on the source? Can I send little bits? And is there places where I can recreate that by creating these different paths that can be created by putting different surfaces in the way? So that's an explanation why this screening idea doesn't screen for single photon. It screens for bits of photon. Okay, that's what it's screening for. It's breaking the photons, clearly. I would argue. Clearly it can be understood that no photon in its original polarization could possibly get through the screen, because the holes in the screen are so small that there's no way a photon gets through. So you already broke them into pieces, and now you're just throwing the pieces and saying, can I recreate phase? And clearly if there's a needle in the way, I'm going to be more likely to recreate phase, not less likely. More surfaces, more opportunity. Surfaces create opportunity to reconstruct the broken photon. Alright, so that's probably enough of a video and such. So I'm going to make one of these short videos on gravity and the other subjects as stated, and I'm really just going to point to those over and over again and just point out how that's what I want to counter argument to. I want somebody to say how I'm wrong with something called a real argument. Yeah, that's the challenge. So, till the next time and such.